The Galactic Council chamber was a grand structure, its vast circular expanse filled with representatives from hundreds of interstellar species. The ceiling, a holographic projection of the cosmos, displayed a breathtaking view of the Andromeda core, shifting subtly as time passed. The air was thick with the scent of various alien atmospheres, carefully regulated to accommodate the diverse biological needs of the delegates. Some species required extreme cold, while others thrived in near to toxic levels of methane. Advanced environmental shielding kept them separate, ensuring no one suffocated during the proceedings. At the center of the chamber stood the Council's speaker, a towering being of the Velari race, known for their elongated crystalline forms that refracted light in dazzling colors. His voice, deep and reverberating, carried a tone of importance as he addressed the assembly. This summit marks a crucial moment in galactic history. We gather here not as enemies, not as competitors, but as civilizations united in the pursuit of lasting peace and security. The murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd, though some factions remained skeptical. Humanity's presence, however, was the most anticipated. Ever since their rapid emergence as a dominant interstellar force, their involvement in council affairs had been unpredictable. Unlike older civilizations, which had spent millennia developing alliances and rivalries, humans had ascended at an alarming rate, using their ingenuity and adaptability to carve out a place among species that had ruled the stars for eons. The human delegation sat near the front, their expressions unreadable. Ambassador Elias Grayson, a seasoned diplomat with a reputation for strategic brilliance, observed the chamber with sharp, calculating eyes. He had been in negotiations before, in situations where a single misstep could cost lives. He had faced warlords, corrupt officials, and scheming politicians, but nothing compared to the sheer complexity of the Galactic Council. Here, deception was masked behind eloquent speeches, and power struggles unfolded beneath layers of diplomatic pleasantries. To his right sat Commander Danae Foster, a military attaché whose presence ensured that the Council understood one thing: humanity was not just here to negotiate, but to assess threats. Her posture was rigid, her gaze cold and analytical. She had seen battle, and unlike Grayson, she trusted words far less than actions. The final member of the delegation, Advisor Lucien Patel, specialized in interspecies relations and linguistic patterns. His job was to detect the nuances behind carefully chosen words, reading between lines that others overlooked. As the speaker finished his introduction, a holographic display flickered to life above the center of the chamber. It showed a series of agreements, terms, and clauses regarding the proposed Intergalactic Security Accord, a treaty meant to unify the major powers against external threats. In theory, it was a step toward stability. In reality, treaties were rarely without hidden motives. One by one, representatives from the major factions gave their initial statements. The Threx Dominion, a reptilian empire known for its military dominance, expressed support for the accord but insisted on additional provisions regarding border disputes. The Oran Collective, a species of symbiotic organisms that functioned as a hive mind, voiced concerns about potential military escalation. The Zith Empire, a long-standing member of the Council, delivered its statement last. Chancellor Vorkan of the Zith Empire stepped forward. His species, bipedal and insectoid, was known for its methodical approach to governance and its history of calculated expansion. His compound eyes reflected the chamber's dim lighting as he spoke in measured tones. The Zith Empire has always stood for peace, stability, and order. We believe this accord represents a necessary step toward the greater unity of our galaxy. However, in matters of security, hesitation is weakness. We cannot afford to delay in taking decisive action against those who threaten our collective prosperity. A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. The phrasing was subtle, but its implications were not lost on those who understood the nuances of diplomatic language. Vorkan's words suggested preemptive action, an endorsement of strategic intervention before threats could materialize. It was a veiled argument for militarization under the guise of unity. Grayson exchanged a glance with Foster and Patel. Something was off. Patel's fingers twitched slightly, a sign that he had noticed something important. He quickly scrolled through his datapad, running a translation analysis. A few seconds later, his face tensed. He leaned closer to Grayson and whispered, his voice barely audible. That phrase he just used. In our diplomatic lexicon, it translates literally as the silence before the slaughter. Historically, it was used before mass exterminations and preemptive invasions. Grayson's jaw tightened. He had heard similar rhetoric before in human history. Politicians and military leaders often spoke of security and peace while preparing for war. It was a game as old as civilization itself. The problem was, in galactic politics, consequences were on a much grander scale. Foster's expression darkened. "They're planning something," she muttered, "and they expected us to either overlook it or play along." Grayson didn't respond immediately. He assessed the room, watching how the other delegations reacted. Some seemed oblivious, others wary, but none appeared to grasp the full weight of the situation. Humanity had a unique advantage, deciphering intent beyond surface-level words. It was a survival instinct deeply ingrained in them, a byproduct of centuries of war, diplomacy, and deception on Earth. He exhaled slowly, making his decision. "We're leaving." Patel blinked. "What?" Foster stiffened. "Are you sure?" Grayson stood, smoothing out his uniform. "If we stay, we legitimize this. We give them the illusion that we're on board. No, humanity doesn't play this game. If the Council wants to walk into a war blindly, that's their choice. We're not going to be complicit." Without another word, he turned and walked toward the exit. Foster hesitated for only a second before following. Patel glanced back at the chamber, at the sea of confused faces watching them, then hurried after them. Silence fell across the room. A ripple of uncertainty spread through the delegates as whispers broke out among the various species. Never before had a delegation walked out of a council summit in such a manner. It was a blatant refusal, a message clearer than any spoken word. Chancellor Vorkon's mandibles twitched, his compound eyes narrowing as he watched the humans disappear beyond the grand doors. His plan had relied on their compliance, or at the very least, their hesitation. Their abrupt exit was unexpected, and unexpected variables were dangerous. The Veolari speaker's crystalline form pulsed slightly as he tried to regain control of the meeting. "Let us take a brief recess," he announced. "It seems we must assess the situation before proceeding." The meeting dissolved into chaos. Some representatives turned to their aides, frantically discussing what had just happened. Others made discreet calls to their governments. The unspoken question on everyone's mind was the same. What did the humans see that the rest of them missed? In the corridors beyond the chamber, Grayson walked with purpose, his mind racing. He could already hear the echoing footsteps of messengers being sent to follow them, desperate for an explanation, but humanity owed them nothing. Whatever game was being played, the humans had just flipped the board. The corridors of the Galactic Council's grand chamber stretched ahead, their polished surfaces reflecting the dim glow of overhead lights. Elias Grayson walked with measured steps, his face set in a mask of calm control, though his mind raced with calculations. The echoes of his footsteps, followed closely by those of Commander Danae Foster and Advisor Lucian Patel, seemed deafening in the sudden quiet. They had exited the chamber without a word, leaving behind a roomful of confused and wary representatives. Yet the real consequences of their decision had only begun to unfold. A few steps behind, Patel quickened his pace, reaching Grayson's side. He kept his voice low. "You know, they're going to demand an explanation." Grayson didn't slow. "Let them demand." Foster shot a glance over her shoulder. "We're being followed." It wasn't a surprise. The Galactic Council was many things. An institution of governance, a diplomatic forum, a stage for posturing, but above all it was a nest of endless observation. Every movement, every breath taken in its halls was noted, analyzed, and stored away for later advantage. Now that the human delegation had done the unthinkable, leaving midsection without a single justification, the council would move quickly to determine why. Patel exhaled sharply. It won't take them long to realize why we left. Grayson's jaw tightened. It's not about them realizing. It's about what they'll do once they understand. Ahead, the entrance to the human embassy loomed, a secured sector of the council's diplomatic compound, heavily guarded and reinforced against potential threats. As the three approached, the automated security system activated, scanning their biometrics before allowing them through. The moment the doors sealed shut behind them, Grayson turned to face Foster. Status. She had already moved toward the nearest console, hands gliding over the interface as she checked the embassy's external monitoring systems. Council security is repositioning. We're under surveillance, but no direct action yet. Yet, Grayson echoed. His eyes flickered toward the main display, where a live feed showed the council chamber still in disarray. Representatives had broken into smaller groups, debating among themselves in hushed voices. Some had already left their seats, likely to contact their respective homeworlds. But at the center of it all, Chancellor Vorkon remained seated, unmoving. Grayson studied him carefully. The Scythe leader's body language hadn't changed. He was still the composed, calculating diplomat he had been before the humans walked out. Yet something in his stillness was unsettling. While others scrambled to make sense of the situation, Vorkon did nothing. He simply waited. Patel narrowed his eyes. He was prepared for a response. Foster looked up from the console. But not this one. It was true, the Chancellor had expected resistance, counterarguments, perhaps even an extended debate. What he had not anticipated was the complete withdrawal of humanity from the discussion. It disrupted whatever script he had intended to follow, leaving him in uncharted territory. Grayson turned back to Patel. How long before someone demands a private meeting? Patel hesitated, then checked his datapad. 3 minutes ago, we received an urgent message from the Valari speaker. He wants to discuss our departure in confidence. Grayson nodded, unsurprised. The speaker, unlike many of his colleagues, wasn't a fool. He had likely already pieced together fragments of the situation and was seeking answers before the council collapsed into full-blown paranoia. Foster folded her arms. Are we taking the meeting? No, Grayson said. Not yet. Petal frowned. Then what's the plan? Grayson glanced once more at the feet of the chamber, at the growing uncertainty in the room, at the subtle way Vorkon's posture had shifted, just slightly, barely noticeable. We wait. Patel inhaled through his nose. And if they take that as an act of hostility, Grayson's expression was unreadable. Then they'll finally understand what fear feels like. The embassy remained silent for several minutes, tension hanging thick in the air. Outside, council officials were already mobilizing, their movements growing more frantic. Then the first external transmission request arrived. Foster checked the origin. Zinnia delegation. Patel let out a quiet breath. And so it begins. Grayson nodded. Decline it. The request was ignored. Seconds later, another arrived. This one from the Threx Dominion. Then another, this time from the Oron Collective. One by one, various factions reached out, some demanding, others pleading for clarification. The humans responded to none. Outside, the panic escalated. In the council chamber, delegates exchanged worried glances as their attempts at communication were met with silence. It was one thing for humans to leave. It was another for them to refuse discussion entirely. For the first time in decades, the council realized that humanity held more power than they had ever acknowledged, and no one knew what they would do next. Chancellor Vorkon remained seated at the center of the chamber, his compound eyes fixed on the empty space where the human delegation had been moments before. The whispers of the gathered species grew into murmurs, then into barely contained arguments as the tension climbed. Representatives exchanged frantic words with their aides, some already dispatching encrypted messages to their homeworlds. No one had expected the humans to leave, let alone ignore all attempts at communication. The Velari speaker stood from his podium, his crystalline form shifting as he raised his hands to demand order. The glow of his body pulsed, signaling a rare moment of concern from his species. "This chamber will not descend into chaos," he declared, his voice steady, though lacking its usual authority. "Humanity's departure, while unprecedented, does not warrant fear. We must understand their reasoning before making assumptions." A representative of the Threx Dominion, a tall, scaled figure in gold ceremonial armor, scoffed. "Understand their reasoning? They just insulted every race in this room. This was not a negotiation, it was a declaration." His forked tongue flicked out as he glanced at Vorkan. "And I suspect our esteemed Chancellor may have an idea of why." Vorkan remained silent, his fingers clicking idly against the table before him. He had not spoken since the moment the humans had walked away, nor had he sent a message demanding an explanation. While others rushed to decipher what had happened, he had simply waited. Now, as eyes turned toward him, he finally exhaled and leaned forward. "I find it fascinating," he mused, his mandibles twitching slightly, "that the moment humanity acts unpredictably, the rest of you fall into panic." His voice remained measured, controlled, but there was a quiet menace behind his words. "Is this not what you accuse my empire of? Sowing uncertainty? Playing a long game?" The Velari speaker stiffened. "Chancellor, if you have knowledge regarding this matter, I suggest you share it now." Vorkan tilted his head, his gaze sweeping across the room. "Oh, I have many theories. But speculation is beneath us, is it not? What I do know is that humans saw something no one else did, and instead of voicing it, they chose silence. That silence is what you truly fear." A low growl rumbled from the Oran delegate, whose bioorganic form pulsed in agitation. What did they see? Vorkan let the question hang in the air before finally rising from his seat. His long, segmented limbs moved slowly, deliberately. "Perhaps," he said, his tone growing softer, more dangerous, "we should be asking what they already knew before they arrived." The words sent a ripple through the room. A soft chime echoed as another failed transmission attempt from the Council to the Human Embassy appeared on the central display. The speaker's expression hardened. "Enough. If humanity will not respond to us, we will take matters into our own hands." Vorkan turned slightly. "And how do you propose to do that?" The speaker straightened. "A delegation will be sent to their embassy. Directly." A few voices raised in protest, but no one dared to outright refuse. The humans had made the first move, and now the council had no choice but to respond. The speaker continued, his voice regaining its authority. "Ambassador Shaltek of the Veari, General Koresh of the Threx Dominion, and High Scholar Lethari of the Oran will accompany me. We will confront humanity face to face." Vorkan's mandibles twitched in amusement. "Ha ha! Diplomacy through pressure, an interesting choice." The speaker ignored him and signaled for the chamber doors to be opened. The delegation was formed in moments, each representative carrying the weight of their species behind them. As they departed, Vorkan remained still, watching. He had no intention of following them. He did not need to. Whatever would happen next, he already understood one thing. Humanity had forced the entire council into playing a game of their choosing, and the council was already losing. The Veilari speaker led the delegation through the towering corridors of the diplomatic compound, his crystalline form pulsing faintly with restrained urgency. Beside him, Ambassador Shaltek of the Veilari moved with careful precision, her elongated limbs shifting gracefully as she matched his pace. General Koresh of the Threx Dominion walked in measured, powerful strides, his golden armor catching the dim overhead light. High Scholar Lethari of the Orion Collective, his bioorganic tendrils curling inward in deep contemplation, remained silent as he moved at their side. The group did not speak as they neared the human embassy. The energy within the halls had changed. Where before there had been constant motion, envoys rushing between meetings, and aides murmuring into communication devices. Now there was an unnatural stillness. The ripple effect of humanity's departure had already begun to spread beyond the chamber, casting a shadow of doubt across the entire compound. Even those who had not been present at the summit sensed the growing uncertainty. As the delegation reached the reinforced doors of the human sector, a pair of armored human guards remained stationed outside, their visors expressionless, their weapons held at their sides in non-aggressive but unmistakable readiness. The delegation stopped a few feet away. The speaker inhaled deeply before addressing them. "We seek an audience with Ambassador Grayson." The guards did not respond immediately. Instead, one of them tapped a small device on his wrist, sending an encrypted signal through the embassy's internal network. The silence stretched between the two sides, heavy with unspoken tension. After a long pause, the guard finally spoke. "You may enter. Unarmed." The implication was clear. Humanity did not trust them enough to permit weapons within their domain. General Koresh's nostrils flared slightly, but he made no protest as he removed the ceremonial blade at his side and placed it into the designated containment field. The others followed, each relinquishing their personal devices before stepping forward. The reinforced doors slid open with a deep, mechanical hum. Inside, the atmosphere was different from the rest of the compound. The temperature was controlled to human standards, cooler than what was comfortable for many species. The lighting was dimmer, more subdued. The architecture lacked the intricate ornamentation found in other embassies, favoring a design that was functional, direct. At the far end of the room, Ambassador Elias Grayson sat behind a wide console, his expression unreadable. At his right stood Commander Danae Foster, her arms crossed, her posture rigid with a soldier's discipline. Advisor Lucian Patil remained seated to Grayson's left, his fingers idly tapping against the surface of his datapad. He did not look up as the delegation entered, his focus remaining on the stream of data running across his screen. The speaker did not hesitate. "You understand why we are here." Grayson met his gaze, but said nothing. The speaker's crystalline form pulsed once before he continued. "Your abrupt departure has destabilized the Council. We demand to know the reason for your actions." Grayson leaned back in his chair, studying the group before him. "You don't demand anything from us." The statement was calm, almost indifferent, but it carried the weight of finality. General Koresh stepped forward, his golden armor reflecting the dim light. "Then consider it a request." His voice was low, firm. "Your silence has sent ripples across every major faction. The longer you refuse to explain, the more dangerous this becomes." Foster's expression remained unreadable, but Patel finally looked up from his datapad. His eyes flickered toward the general, then to the others. "Interesting choice of words," he murmured. The speaker exhaled sharply. "We are not here to waste time on word games. You have information that the rest of the Council does not. If we are to maintain stability, we must share knowledge." Grayson's lips twitched into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Must we?" A flicker of irritation crossed the speaker's crystalline face. "The Council does not function if its members act in isolation." Grayson tilted his head slightly. "Perhaps it shouldn't function at all." The room fell silent. High Scholar Lothari, who had remained quiet until now, finally spoke. His voice was a strange, layered tone, two harmonics overlapping as his bioorganic structure shifted slightly. "You believe the Council is beyond repair?" Grayson did not answer immediately. Instead, he reached forward, activating a display in the center of the room. The holographic projection that appeared was not the standard galactic star map, nor the terms of the security treaty they had abandoned. Instead, it was a series of intelligence reports, heavily redacted but unmistakable in their implication. Foster spoke for the first time. "The Zith Empire has been preparing for war." General Koresh's nostrils flared. "Impossible." "No," Patel said quietly. "Inevitable." He tapped a section of the display, enlarging a sequence of intercepted transmissions. Their diplomatic rhetoric is carefully crafted, but beneath the surface, their fleet movements have been shifting for months. This treaty was never about security. The speaker's crystalline form dimmed slightly. "You have proof," Grayson exhaled slowly. "We have enough to recognize a pattern, and we also know that the council either ignored it or—" His gaze flickered toward the speaker. "Allowed it." The accusation was subtle, but the weight behind it was undeniable. High Scholar Lithari's tendrils twitched in agitation. "Why did you not present this before?" Grayson's expression hardened. "Because if we had, it would have been buried under political maneuvering, reframed as human paranoia, diluted until it was nothing but an irrelevant discussion point." His fingers tapped against the console. "Walking away forced the council to realize something was wrong. Now you're here, demanding answers. That alone proves we were right." The speaker remained silent for a long moment. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than before. "What do you intend to do now?" Grayson's answer was simple. "We're watching." The words sent a ripple through the delegation, each member processing the implications. The humans were not acting out of aggression. They were not mobilizing fleets, not issuing threats. They had simply stepped away and forced the entire galaxy to question its own stability. And now, they were waiting to see who would break first. Silence settled over the human embassy. The delegation stood motionless, the weight of Grayson's words pressing down on them. His declaration had not been a threat, nor an ultimatum. It was worse. It was certainty. Humanity was watching. Humanity had seen what others had ignored, had chosen a path no one had expected, and now the rest of the galaxy was left to decide how to respond. The Valar speaker's crystalline form pulsed erratically, a subtle indication of internal conflict. He had anticipated resistance, anger, even hostility, but not this. The humans had stepped away from the Galactic Council, not in defiance, but in quiet condemnation. They had chosen not to play the game at all, and that choice had unraveled everything. Ambassador Shaltek of the Velari shifted her elongated limbs uneasily. "What happens next?" Grayson met her gaze, his expression unreadable. "That depends." General Koresh's hands clenched at his sides. "On what?" Grayson exhaled, leaning forward slightly. "On whether the Council continues pretending it holds power, or whether it finally acknowledges that it never did." Koresh's golden scales darkened in frustration. "The Council has governed for centuries. It has held this galaxy together through war and crisis." Batel gave a quiet, humorless chuckle. "Has it?" Koresh turned sharply, his reptilian eyes narrowing. "You think the galaxy would be better off without it?" Grayson interlaced his fingers and rested them on the console. "I think the galaxy is already falling apart. The difference is, humanity saw it first." The speaker's glow dimmed slightly. "And now you wait." Grayson nodded. Yes, the words carried an unspoken challenge, a waiting game, one the humans knew they would win. The speaker's form flickered as he turned to the others. "There will be consequences." Grayson's expression did not change. "For who?" No one answered. The delegation had come for explanations, but they had left with something else. Doubt. Doubt in the council, doubt in their own authority. Doubt in whether they had ever truly been the ones in control. The speaker finally straightened, his glow returning to its steady rhythm. "The council will reconvene. There will be discussion." Grayson stood, his movements deliberate, his presence unshaken. "Then we'll be watching." The delegation turned and left. As the heavy doors of the human embassy sealed behind them, the speaker exhaled slowly, the sound a quiet hum of crystalline resonance. His steps were steady, but his mind churned with uncertainty. The others walked beside him in silence, each absorbed in their own thoughts. Koresh finally spoke as they moved down the corridor. "The humans may have doomed the council." The speaker did not answer immediately. Then, quietly, he said, "Or forced it to reveal what it has always been." High Scholar Lethari's tendrils curled inward, his organic structure shifting in slow, rhythmic pulses. The other factions will react soon. They will attempt to test humanity's resolve. The speaker's glow pulsed faintly. Then we will see who survives. The delegation parted ways. Each returned to their respective embassies, their respective species. Each sent messages back to their homeworlds, careful reports of what had transpired. And across the galaxy, power began to shift in imperceptible ways. The Zith Empire, once confident in its silent machinations, hesitated. Other factions, once assured of stability, began to question. Trust fractured, and through it all, humanity watched. Not as conquerors, not as aggressors, but as the only ones who had seen the inevitable long before anyone else, and had chosen to walk away. The game was over. Now the rest of the galaxy had to decide what came next.